So this video is intended to be a project announcement for a modified Italian gown inspired by Lobelia Sackville-Baggins. And it was intended for the current Foundations Revealed contest going on now to take a character from literature and to design a costume around them. However, I'm not entirely sure I'm actually going to get this project done in time for that contest. But I will go ahead and continue on with it anyway. And the fabrics that I found were this one here, which is a pretty cotton print by vintageandvogue.com. I just thought it was suitably period correct. And then, stolen from my bird cage, where my birds perch, I found this old cotton sheet. I think it's a queen size, but it is very pretty with the orange and the yellow roses, which I thought would be appropriate for both A Hobbit and any kind of 18th century, because that's the closest I could find to any kind of chintz within a reasonable amount of money, because yeah. So we begin with the arduous process of going and sketching out the actual design for Lobelia. Generally, what I like to do for any watercolors would be to draw them out in a sketchbook first, and then make a copy either scaled up or at the same size to then transfer to a watercolor paper. Typically, the reason being is because I erase a lot, and erasing on watercolor paper tends to, like, almost very slightly, it does kind of scuff up and scrape up the paper. Just the abrasion from the eraser onto the surface of the paper will kind of mess it up a little bit. So if I make a copy, then I can then transfer the drawing to the watercolor paper without having to do very much erasing at all. And I'll just minimize any kind of effects on the watercolor paper when I go to actually apply the watercolor to it. So just a quick explanation there. So from there, I just go about transferring the actual drawing or copy of the drawing to the watercolor paper. I do this in a very old-fashioned way. Are there better ways? Probably. Do I know what they are? No. So I just scribble charcoal using a charcoal stick all over the back of the copy, and then I just trace over the lines. It's not the neatest thing in the world, but it's effective. And yes, it takes forever. So once I get the charcoal transfer done, I go in and I just kind of further, I guess I clarify any smaller details, so like the face or any lines that didn't quite transfer over with the charcoal, just so I could have a clearer picture of what I'm working with. I don't like having all that graphite on the watercolor paper, because when you go to paint over that, it does smear. So that little gray blob that I'm using, that's a kneaded eraser. And those are excellent for just kind of picking up the surface of the graphite or the charcoal, any charcoal remnants on the watercolor paper, just like I did there. And it just kind of captures all of that extra graphite and charcoal so you don't smear it around your page. I then go in with my Micron fine liners. I only use two. I used the 0.45 millimeter Micron, and then I used the 0.25 Micron. The 0.25 was for the smaller lines on the figure itself, and then the 45 was for the details on the back. I really like like the way the black ink goes on watercolor paper. I can still get a really, really sketchy look with those pens because they are so fine. And they are archival ink, and they're mostly waterproof and fade proof, so it won't fade over time, and the watercolor itself won't smear it. On Lobelia right there, you can see that it is yellow. That is brisket, I think it's called. It's masking fluid, basically. It's watercolor masking fluid, and it has a yellow tint to it so you can differentiate it from the paper when you go to peel it off. It basically masks everything underneath so that when you apply watercolor washes on top, like I'm doing here with the backgrounds, it doesn't get on the actual image itself, and you don't have any harsh lines, which you could get with watercolor if you try tracing around the figure before masking it. This way you could just get a cleaner finish without actually obscuring your figure. The watercolors I use are the Koi watercolors. I think they're by Sakura. They're the, Sakura Products Corporation. They're the same makers, I think, of the Microns. Yep. So I guess those two were designed to go together. It's the Koi Watercolors Pocket Field Sketchbox are the watercolors that I'm primarily using. In the porcelain dish, those are Windsor and Newton watercolors from a tube. The brushes are some, I think they're Windsor & Newton that I found on clearance at Michael's. And then the super cheap Artist Loft are the black ones with the blue bands. They are awful, 0 out of 10, do not recommend you buying them. Praying is another really good watercolor set. It's good for students. It is a really good watercolor set. I mean, I'd rate that probably above the Koi's, to be completely honest. And I just kind of mush up the background a little bit with the paper towel, just dipping it in my palette. And then the most satisfying part is peeling up all of that masking fluid to reveal the perfectly clean image underneath. And then with my tiniest of tiny Windsor & Newton brushes, I go forth and add the details. So if you don't know who Lobelia Sackville-Baggins is, if you haven't read The Hobbit, then A, go read The Hobbit because it's excellent. It's basically only 280 or so pages of magic and wonder and humor, and it's the most charming book. But in the books, Bilbo does mention, or the narrator, does go in and mention Lobelia a couple times. She is his cousin who stole his silver spoons. And she isn't terribly described in the books, I don't think, but she is kind of taken to be the general consensus, I should say, is that she's a little bit snobby, a bit greedy. She encapsulates a few figures which you don't expect to see out of a hobbit, like her greed for his silver spoons. But I find the general consensus of her description to be mostly hysterical, and I kind of like how she's presented as being a little bit of a more posh, snobby hobbit, which is why when I saw an Italian gown for the first time, my first thought was Lobelia Baggins, because the general aesthetic suits her. And I think my most exciting prospect of this project is probably going to be that bear chair, because they're the most beautiful hats and I really want to make one. I'm just applying little dots of the Frisket to her petticoat there. In hindsight, don't use a paintbrush. It's a really bad idea because that stuff doesn't really come out. Next time I would say use a toothpick or a Q-tip to apply Frisket. It would not ruin your paintbrushes. And then from there I just add just very subtle shading to the white apron before going in and adding the rose chintzy, not really chintz is it, the floral pattern to the outer dress of her Italian gown. Okay, thank you for watching, and if you liked this video and want to follow along with the process of me making the dress for Lobelia, then feel free to subscribe. If you're participating in the Foundations Revealed contest and you are making a costume, then please leave a comment below on what it is that you're making. I'd really like to follow everybody else's progress too. I think you could probably find a lot over on the Instagram as well. And any and all of the art supplies that I use, I will go ahead and have links down below. They're not affiliated. Just when I find good art supplies, I like to share it because it can be quite pricey to find good art supplies. It's a bit of a minefield, so when I find good stuff, I like to share that. And I think that's it. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!